So welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us here at The Economist. The issues that were laid out by our two UN visitors from afar kind of set the table, right? Here in South Africa, and in particular with Eskom is playing such a vital role here, I think the entire sustainability and energy world is watching you. You're, in a sense, a test case for the world, fairly or unfairly. And it seems you have the best and the worst of the world's challenges, right? In terms of the best, you have a country with enormous natural endowments, with a huge demographic dividend. You have the potential for extraordinary growth here. We've known this the deepest and most sophisticated capital markets in Africa, a global connectivity that many other countries would be very desirous of. Of course, you're blessed with wonderful weather here in this particular town. But more broadly, you have an extraordinary potential for growth. At the same time, you have an endowment when it comes to talking about energy and climate issues where overwhelmingly your electricity comes from coal, as it is in a half a dozen other important countries in the developing world. You have some challenges with capital, with underinvestment for years, and your own company historically has had some challenges with management, some suggestions of corruption in the past, and perhaps obstructionism of clean energy. So we want to understand, with the government now committed to a just energy transition, with the plans in place for it, quite dramatic and important move in that direction, how do you reconcile those two challenges? The potential with some of the practicalities of a spotty record thus far, and a legacy of being one of the most carbon-intensive economies in the developing world as you enter a carbon-constrained world of CBAM and other restrictions that are going to squeeze the vice on industry here. How do you thread that needle?
Yeah, Vijay, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone else. I just want to also indicate that the government strategy on the transition is also Eskom strategy. So we embrace the need to move towards a low emissions environment. Ourselves, we have our very clear targets in terms of our 2030 emissions targets that we're following through on. We will have a very active role to play in ensuring that the country moves towards its 2050 net zero target. So we are on that path. We also recognize that it is primarily entities like ourselves and the others, that are main contributors when it comes to the country's overall emissions level. We've indicated that whilst we have made some cost corrections in as far as our strategy for decommissioning of our coal stations, for instance, is concerned, we remain fixed on delivering on our 70 or so million tons carbon CO2 emissions targets by 2030. And we'll do that through various interventions in our stations, whilst we are ensuring that there's security of supply for the country. It's also important that we balance the needs of sustainability, energy security, and access.
So I want to come to security of supply in a moment. I think everyone in this room will know about the challenges of blackouts in the past. But before we get to that crucial topic, on the question of decarbonization, again, given your asset base is overwhelmingly coal that you have inherited as a relatively new CEO, how do you advance the program for decarbonizing your portfolio and thereby helping your industrial customers, for example, to decarbonize and meet their net zero goals or to export to Europe and so on? What is your plan?
We have articulated a clear intention to add some 2 to 2.5 gigawatts of renewable energy into our fleet by 2030. By the time we take off some of the older stations, we'll have a pipeline of between 22 to 40 gigawatts of renewables. Quite a number of stations are actually coming to end of life by 2035 in our profile and production. Over and above just gas, we have identified opportunities for renewables, both from a PV and wind perspective, that we can have at the sites where our coal stations are located at the moment, close to grid connectivity. We have done work around EIAs, and we progress in that for pump storage within the Tubatse areas. We have looked at the transition primary energy perspective.
So renewables are playing a big part.
Renewables will play a big part going forth, and from a country strategy point of view, we remain plugged into the country's ambitions on baseload Keynote for nuclear and technologies around small modular reactors that can be deployed across the country as a whole.
Let's put a pin in nuclear for now. Of course, South Africa had the world lead with Pebblebed many years ago, but let's leave the SMRs and nuclear aside for the moment. On renewables, it's encouraging to hear ambition from Eskom, but I have to express a little skepticism that I've picked up from people in the energy and investment community. There has been a dramatic takeoff of renewables, we all know, in South Africa in recent years, but a lot of that has been, of course, through independent power producers, through PPAs, to corporates, in part because of the blackout problems. Yeah. Finding a solution, an alternative solution. Sometimes there's been the sense in the past that Eskom was not particularly friendly towards that, discouraged those renewables. Maybe there were also grid connection issues that are challenges. What can you give assurance to this audience that would love to see that, I'm sure, that you are serious about the renewables, and what do you need, whether it's regulatory changes or transmission or grid upgrades, to make sure that that plan succeeds?
Yeah, Vijay, let me set the context right. Eskom was very clear in terms of its own path way back to 2011 in as far as the need to transition towards renewables. Eskom did not participate in the first rounds of renewables, not because it did not want to. It was excluded from doing so through shareholder interventions. That's a fact. The issue of grid connectivity emanates from the many years of capital starvation within the business and the need to prioritize capital towards ensuring that the running plants were maintained. This is a big price we're paying as a country. What are we doing? As Eskom, we have operationalized an independent national transmission company of South Africa since the 1st of July. Its focus is purely on accelerating the rollout of the transmission development plan to ensure that we can connect areas like the Western Cape, Northern Cape, and the Southern Cape with immense capabilities and abilities from a renewables perspective. We have looked very critically from a technical perspective of how we can support and accelerated connections. There's some 3.5 gigawatts of wind potential that can be connected as soon as the regulator makes up its mind. As we accelerate, interventions like infrastructure and the need to transition, we also need to move with pace to get the appropriate regulatory frameworks in place. And there's an area that is now receiving attention to ensure that the regulations accompany the pace that we have for the changes.
So that sets the frame. Now, there is a question of capital. This is, as I had mentioned before, the most advanced capital market in Africa. And even so, the weighted average cost of capital is higher than it would be in OECD countries, for example, and in particular with renewables. Your own investment plan, historically, your company has been underinvested for complicated reasons, but that's the fact. How are you planning to get the kind of equity investment? Are you open to outside investment? What kind of novel financing are you open to scale up these renewables to set them on a turbocharged path?
Look, the transition will cost this country over quite substantial amounts of money compared to what's been pledged. The $12.5 billion or so that's been pledged is really not significant in terms of covering all our needs. So we have to get into a space.
I think the order of magnitude greater amount is needed, right?
Yeah,
from the
absolutely.
plans I've seen for the energy transition.
And we have to be looking at, the terms of the funding. Blended finance is going to be quite key, and conditions attached to that. We've seen conditions that have not been developmental in nature. Many of in fact, the first 2 or 3 rounds investment potentials really benefited the funding nations, as opposed to enabling an environment of industrialization that's required to support the transition from the kind of jobs that we have to the new ones that makes the transition also acceptable to the communities within which we operate. So we need blended finance with conditions that are going to be of a positive impact in terms of local manufacturing.
Let's dig into that a little bit, because you mentioned communities. I had the opportunity this week to go and visit the Komati community, where, of course, a plant was shut down and a mine nearby, unrelated to you. But nevertheless, the community has been hit very hard. Now, this is mistakenly conflated with the JETP program. Of course, it was an independent decision. But nevertheless, I'm curious, because we did have the international high-profile Just Energy Transition Partnership announced, that for which South Africa was the test case for the world, come on the heels of that. The community that I talked with, massive unemployment, quite a lot of unhappiness, some of it directed at your company, but more broadly at the lack of opportunities, even though you do have programs to try to train people to be solar technicians and other kinds of jobs. I noticed, and you've taken care of the Eskom people, there are multiplier effects through contractors, through the wider community. What lesson do you learn from the Komati experience that should inform what happens with the broader energy transition across those coal communities in that area?
The decision and timing to transition needs to take into account the wider value chain stakeholders. That's what we really need to do. I've come out.
So that shouldn't come from your ballot.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not. It's not an Eskom problem. It's a country problem. All stakeholders are aware of it. What we need to do is to surface the facts and ensure that the interventions that are placed on the table take into account the totality of the system. As you said, in Komati, our employees have been assigned to different operations within our stable, but we've impacted the value chain partners and as a result disrupted the society in that space. We have stalled the decommissioning of the other stations that were planned to come off between 2024 and 2027, not only because of energy security issues, but also to give ourselves adequate time to do thorough work in terms of planning. So we have now, through our agents, looked at what are the interventions that needs to be in place to enable the transition and bring in an element of justness within it. This is something that we need to mobilize South Africa as a whole to come to the party. The province in Mpumalanga, the local municipalities, national government, ourselves, the private sector that is also operating in that space. And there I also say those that are looking to invest and take opportunities that comes on the back of the just transition within the country also need to be thinking about what is their contribution in terms of the ensuring that the social fabric is also taken along into the next week.
This frame is very encouraging. You're taking the wider lens, and you've been quite tough about Komati's lessons. I've seen your comments in the press since you've taken over CEO. But just to push you a bit further on this, a country with the official unemployment rates close to 35%, unofficial rates probably higher, and certainly youth unemployment, and in places like Komati where I went, significantly higher, placing the burden of economic growth and opportunity for that young, hungry population on the backs of an energy transition, which itself you have to keep the lights on, right? We know what happened with the blackouts that you've had in the past. That becomes unsustainable. And so does this mean that in practice, we're probably going to see a slower energy transition and a longer reliance on coal than perhaps climate idealists would like? That the practical story here is that coal is pretty hard to kick when you're as addicted to it as South Africa is, in the absence of alternatives being scaled up, as well as job creation being scaled up. Because what I see around the world, solar panels might create a few jobs while you're building them, but they don't need a lot of people to run solar farms, right? Yeah. And so it's not like for those good industrial jobs that are in the conventional Eskom facilities where people have training, skills, and some sense of lifelong employment. It's not like for like. We don't have an easy fix here, do we? Yeah,
look, the joblessness in the country is not going to be solved only by focusing on opportunities emanating from the energy transition. We need to have the economy grow, and so other stimulations for the economy are necessary, but we do recognize that energy plays a pivotal role in ensuring that there's economic growth. So we're finding ourselves in this nexus of transitioning within an environment that has got significant economic hardships, and this is the focus of government. What we need to do in our own backyard is ensuring that per project basis, we really focus on ensuring that everything that supports the ecosystem is taken into consideration. In the next few weeks, we will start conversations with all stakeholders around what we've seen from the social economic impact studies for these areas, and start getting ready in terms of initiatives that needs to be undertaken with all participants. Yeah.
Now, I want to spend a moment on the situation involving blackouts, or as is euphemistically called load shedding, right? I was born in India. This is nothing new. Many of our visitors are from other parts of Africa. But for an economy as advanced and rich as South Africa is, this was a painful experience over the last number of years. And I was going to give you credit saying there have been 200 plus days without blackouts. But for those of you who are staying in this hotel, which is many of you, we all received a piece of paper telling us there's going to be a blackout tonight in this hotel after 11 a.m. Not your fault, Dan, but they're doing testing of equipment. But tonight I predict between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. the lights will go out. And so just a reminder, I just thought it's too delicious an irony not to bring up. That notwithstanding, tell me about the 200 plus days.
So I can confirm that this is due to maintenance. It's not because of...
not because of Eskom. Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
But as we sit in the dark at 11:01 tonight, we'll be wondering, what did you do successfully? Because again, we believe in giving credit where credit is due while being tough on things that we think should be challenged. It's early days, obviously. After years of challenges, you seem to have turned a bit of a corner, and you're fairly new in the post. Can you give us an insight as to what are the factors, the mix of some demands just going off to renewables and PPAs versus other things you may have introduced or investments that you think, government changes? Give us a quick, short answer as to what's going right now and what will need to keep going right to keep the lights on.
Today is 211 days of no load shedding. We continue to focus on the positive aspects that come out of the performance of our generation fleet. This is the work that is really delivered by our 41,000 people, our employees, our staff, who are very committed to putting this pain behind us. They are well supported through a very structured generation recovery plan. This plan was conceptualized last year prior to my arrival. In its simplest form, it really focuses on prioritizing maintenance of stations that were contributing the most in terms of loss of capacity, making sure that there's adequate resources, both capital and human resources, appropriately positioning skills to areas that are challenging. So you use experience to deal with the most complex areas. We have made decision-making much more leaner, but we have provided leadership. That's very important. We've provided leadership. We have understood the technical issues that need to be attended to. We have plans. We work the plans. We can monitor. We follow through. We did also, of course, get into a space where we are supported externally through peer reviews and support through the NICOM process. And I must also admit that government's bureaucracy has also come to the party to ensure that all the support that we need around us is
what I'm hearing is obviously the context is sluggish economic growth and some big customers taking renewables helps. It eases the problem.
Look, let me tell you.
Still had investment and human dimension.
Yeah, Vijay, we have indicated that on good days we see between 5 and 6 gigawatts of renewable energy contribution. It's positive. We know that that's going to go a long way. But I must also tell you that for us to be able to keep the lights on, we need to get the Eskom fleet to perform. At this level of supply mix, it's the Eskom mix that determines whether we have load shedding or not. So for that reason, we had to be brutal in ensuring that there's operational improvements across our fleet. As time goes on and more renewables come in, of course, that will ease the pressure on the system. On days when the weather is not great, the Eskom capacity has to be available to make up for that component that is not realizable from a renewable energy perspective. So there's been great movements on both sides. We need to get the core of our base load supply functional. And this picture will remain like this for the next 3-4 years, by the way. Yeah.
So Dan, there are tactics, there's strategy, and there's culture. You talked about the tactics. You have a strategy. But what I'm hearing is what the great management thinker Peter Drucker famously said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so unless you get the culture right and reform it and fix it and bring it back to what was once, Eskom was noted as one of the great electricity companies in the world in the past, to return it to that trajectory. So if you're on that journey, 200 plus days certainly suggests you're doing something right, maybe a bit lucky too, but we wish you the best of luck. And I hope to come back next year to find the lights have stayed on for 500 plus days.
That's correct.
Please give Dan a nice round of applause.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.